the mysterious site known as Puma Punku, the gateway of the Puma. The name was given by the local Aymara people who found artifacts at the site depicting imagery of warriors wearing masks made of puma skulls.
High on the windswept plains of the Bolivian Andes, more than 12,000 feet above sea level, sits a ruin so mysterious that even today, it mocks the very idea of human history as we think we know it. This place is called Puma Punku, and it is no ordinary ruin. It is an enigma carved in stone. From a distance, it may look like a scattered field of collapsed walls and toppled blocks. But up close, it tells a story that is far stranger. Here lie stones that weigh more than 100 tons, carved not with rough edges, but with flawless geometry. Some are sliced into perfect 90-degree angles, so sharp and smooth they reflect sunlight. Others are shaped into complex interlocking H-blocks, complete with recesses, grooves, and internal cuts that look less like the work of primitive chisels and more like parts stamped out of a futuristic factory line. And yet, history books insist these marvels were created over 1,500 years ago by the Tiwanaku people, with nothing more than stone hammers and bronze chisels. Imagine trying to cut granite countertops with a spoon, and you'll get a sense of how absurd that claim sounds. For generations, archaeologists, engineers, and skeptics alike have debated the impossible reality of Puma Punku. Some argued it was the result of unimaginable manpower. Others whispered about lost technologies. A few even claimed extraterrestrial intervention. But no matter which theory you believed, one thing was certain. Puma Punku defied explanation. That was, until now. Because for the first time in history, researchers turned to something no one had ever tried before. They gathered every laser scan, every satellite image, every microscopic measurement of Puma Punku ever recorded. Over 12 terabytes of raw data, enough to fill thousands of modern laptops, were fed into a cutting-edge artificial intelligence system. Its task was simple, yet staggering: reverse engineer Puma Punku without human bias, to rebuild the ruins digitally and reveal what the stones themselves had been trying to say for over a millennium. The result? It shocked even the most hardened skeptics. The AI did not simply reconstruct the site. It revealed patterns, alignments, and systems hidden in plain sight. Truths that archaeologists had walked over for centuries without ever recognizing. And what it uncovered was not just surprising, it was unsettling. Because Puma Punku, according to the data, may not have been a ceremonial site at all. It may have been something far more advanced, a modular, astronomical machine, engineered with precision beyond its supposed time. And then came the most chilling revelation of all. Whatever knowledge built Puma Punku vanished. Gone without explanation, without legacy, leaving behind only shattered blocks and an eerie silence. So tonight, we journey into the heart of Puma Punku and the AI secrets that have left researchers asking whether history as we know it is a lie. The ruin that breaks history itself. At first glance, Puma Punku looks like the aftermath of some ancient cataclysm, a field of shattered megaliths strewn across a high plateau in Bolivia. But step closer, and the picture changes. These aren't just broken rocks. They're massive stone blocks carved with such impossible precision that they seem to break history itself. The ruin sits on the Altiplano Plateau, more than 12,000 feet above sea level. This is not a lush, fertile landscape filled with resources. It's a cold, wind-swept environment where oxygen is thin Agriculture is harsh, and survival itself is a challenge. Yet here, at one of the most inhospitable places on Earth, someone built one of the most advanced stone complexes ever discovered. Why? How? The building materials themselves are a mystery. Puma Punku is primarily constructed from two stones, a reddish sandstone and a volcanic rock called andesite. Sandstone is relatively soft, not too hard to shape. But andesite? That's a different story. On the Mohs scale of hardness, andesite ranks around 6, just below quartz. To put that in perspective, your average steel chisel barely makes a scratch against it. Yet somehow, the builders of Puma Punku managed to cut, shape, and polish andesite blocks into forms so exact they look machine-made. And these weren't small blocks. The largest weighs around 131 metric tons, the equivalent of 70 family sedans stacked together. Modern cranes struggle to move such a load. Yet ancient builders supposedly hauled these monoliths miles across rugged terrain, lifted them into place, and locked them together with millimeter precision. Traditional theories suggest they used wooden rollers. But there's one glaring problem. Puma Punku sits above the tree line. No forests, no endless supply of timber. Which means every log would have had to be cut in valleys far below, then dragged up mountainsides before they could even begin moving a single block. Multiply that effort by dozens, even hundreds of blocks, and the simple explanation suddenly feels like an insult to common sense. Then comes the real shock: the precision cuts. Many blocks feature surfaces so smooth they reflect sunlight like mirrors. The famous H blocks are the most astonishing examples. Dozens of andesite stones carved into identical H shapes, complete with recessed reliefs, perfect right angles, T-shaped slots, and internal notches. Line them up, and they interlock seamlessly, like giant Lego pieces. But this isn't random artistry. Some blocks contain eye-shaped grooves, where molten bronze clamps were poured, locking pieces together in a technique resembling modern casting. This suggests not just stonemasonry, but metallurgical knowledge centuries ahead of its time. Bronze casting requires controlled heat, specialized molds, and precise application. Hardly the skill set we expect from a primitive culture with simple hand tools. And yet, despite earthquakes and centuries of erosion, many of these blocks still fit together so tightly that, according to legend, you couldn't slide a razor blade between them. Today, that claim is exaggerated. The stones have shifted and cracked with time. But the fact remains, their original fit was astonishingly exact. So the questions pile up. How do you quarry, carve, and transport stones heavier than a blue whale without modern machinery? What tools were sharp enough, strong enough, to slice through andesite like butter? And perhaps the biggest question: why would a supposedly primitive culture attempt this at all? Why not build with smaller, lighter, easier-to-shape materials? The answers offered by mainstream archaeology are unsatisfying at best. According to history books, the builders were the Tiwanaku people, a pre-Columbian culture that thrived between 500 and 1000 AD. Their toolkit, as far as we know, consisted of stone hammers, ropes, and perhaps basic bronze chisels. No steel, no pulleys, no wheels for heavy transport, and yet, somehow, they achieved feats of engineering that rival what we call advanced today. This contradiction is what makes Puma Punku so unnerving. It's not just that it's impressive, it's that it shouldn't exist. It's like stumbling upon a jet engine buried inside the ruins of a medieval village. The object is real, the craftsmanship undeniable, but the timeline doesn't make sense. Archaeologists have tried to explain it away. They argue that thousands of workers using primitive tools could, theoretically, create such precision through sheer time and labor. They point to experiments where researchers managed to carve small andesite blocks using abrasives like sand and water. And yes, it's technically possible. But carving one block in a laboratory is not the same as carving and assembling hundreds of massive interlocking blocks with uniform precision in the freezing thin air of the Andes. The scale is simply too vast, the time too long, the logistics too implausible. Which is why Puma Punku sits like a thorn in the side of history, a ruin that refuses to fit neatly into our narrative of progress, a structure that seems to whisper, "You are missing something." Maybe it wasn't just manpower. Maybe it wasn't just trial and error. Maybe the builders of Puma Punku had knowledge of tools, of geometry, of metallurgy, of astronomy that we've forgotten. Knowledge that allowed them to accomplish in the 6th century what we struggle to replicate even now. And here's the haunting part. If they had such knowledge, where did it go? Why does history suddenly go silent after Puma Punku? No written manuals, no records of techniques, no next generation carrying the tradition forward. Just ruins and questions. That is why Puma Punku has been called the ruin that breaks history itself. Because it doesn't just defy explanation, it threatens to shatter the timeline of human achievement. And this is where researchers, running out of answers, turn to something new. If humans couldn't solve the puzzle, maybe a machine could. When theories collapse, why only a machine could see the truth? For decades, the official story of Puma Punku went something like this. The Tiwanaku people, armed with little more than stone hammers and bronze chisels, painstakingly pounded the volcanic andesite blocks into shape. With enough manpower, time, and determination, they supposedly managed to carve out the sharp corners, the grooves, and the Lego-like interlocking shapes. Once the blocks were ready, they dragged them across the plateau using ropes, levers, and wooden rollers, before setting them into place to form temples and ceremonial courtyards. On the surface, it sounds plausible. After all, human beings have always been capable of incredible feats when driven by necessity, faith, or ambition. If the Egyptians could build the pyramids, couldn't the Tiwanaku build Puma Punku? But the closer you look, the more that story begins to unravel. Archaeologists and engineers have attempted to replicate the techniques allegedly used at Puma Punku. In controlled settings, researchers took andesite blocks and hammered them with stone tools. After hours of pounding, they managed to make small indentations. With abrasives like sand and water, they polished a corner into a relatively smooth edge. Yes, it worked, on a small scale. But here's the catch. Puma Punku doesn't consist of a few small blocks. It consists of hundreds of massive monoliths, many weighing dozens of tons, each carved with repeating standardized shapes and intricate grooves. Doing this once is one thing. Doing it hundreds of times with precision that can still be measured in thousandths of an inch is something else entirely. The math simply doesn't add up. Let's take the H blocks as an example. Researchers estimate that it would take a team of workers weeks, if not months, to carve just one block to the level of precision found at Puma Punku, using primitive tools. Multiply that by the 45 H blocks found on site, plus hundreds of other massive stones, and the timeline spirals out of control. Add the challenges of transporting these blocks across treeless mountains and aligning them perfectly on site, and the theory begins to crumble under its own weight. So, if the hammer and chisel explanation fails, what else could explain Puma Punku? This is where alternative theories crept in, some intriguing, some controversial, and some bordering on the fantastical. One idea is the geopolymer theory, sometimes called the liquid stone hypothesis. It suggests that the builders of Puma Punku discovered a chemical process that allowed them to dissolve volcanic rock into a slurry, which they then poured into molds. Once hardened, the slurry would resemble natural stone, but with the ability to take on precise shapes. This could explain the sharp corners, the smooth surfaces, and the uniformity of the H-blocks. At first glance, it's an attractive theory, but most geologists have dismissed it outright. Why? Because the andesite at Puma Punku still shows the mineralogical structure of naturally quarried stone. If it had been reconstituted as a man-made concrete, those structures would be disrupted. Instead, the blocks look exactly like what they are: naturally cut andesite. That leaves us back at square one. Traditional archaeology says too simple. Alternative theories say too wild. Neither fits neatly. The frustration among researchers grew. Year after year, Puma Punku resisted explanation. It wasn't just a mystery, it was a wall, a stone riddle that mocked every attempt to solve it. And this is where desperation turned into innovation. In the early 2010s, an international group of archaeologists, engineers, and computer scientists decided to launch what they called the Altiplano Project. Their mission was simple but bold: stop debating theories and instead let the data speak for itself. Over 5 years, teams from Bolivia, Germany, Japan, and the United States descended on Puma Punku with every tool modern science could offer. They mapped the site with high-resolution laser scanners, capturing every angle, every groove, every broken fragment down to the micron. They used ground-penetrating radar to peer beneath the surface, looking for buried structures. They ran chemical analyses on the traces of bronze left in clamp grooves. They studied satellite imagery to track possible quarry routes. Even astronomers were brought in to test whether the site aligned with solar and stellar movements. The result was staggering. More than 12 terabytes of raw data, essentially a digital time capsule of Puma Punku, preserved in its entirety. But gathering data was only half the battle. The real challenge was interpretation. Human beings, no matter how skilled, bring bias into the equation. Archaeologists want to see ritual. Engineers want to see mechanics. Astronomers want to see alignments. Each discipline interprets through its own lens. So the team decided to do something radical. Instead of telling the computer what to look for, they asked it to reverse engineer the site without assumptions. No theories, no cultural bias, just raw numbers, angles, ratios, tool marks, geometric relationships, chemical signatures, astronomical coordinates. The idea was simple, almost elegant. If Puma Punku had a design language, a system, a hidden order, then maybe, just maybe, an artificial intelligence could see it where human eyes could not. What they got back was not just a reconstruction, it was a revelation. Because the AI didn't care about protecting reputations or fitting the ruin neatly into a historical timeline, it didn't care about clinging to dogma or avoiding fringe ideas. To the machine, Puma Punku wasn't a ruin at all. It was a puzzle. And puzzles demand solutions. And once the machine began piecing that puzzle together, Puma Punku stopped looking like a collapsed temple and started looking like something far stranger. The blueprint hidden in stone. When the artificial intelligence began analyzing the mountain of data collected from Puma Punku, it wasn't burdened by human assumptions. It didn't care whether the site was ceremonial, functional, or religious. It didn't care about protecting reputations, academic careers, or cultural timelines. To the AI, Puma Punku wasn't a ruin, it was data. Angles became vectors. Surfaces became ratios. Grooves became repeatable patterns. Even the site's orientation in relation to the sky was just another coordinate to plot. And as the machine pieced all this information together, something extraordinary happened. Puma Punku began to rebuild itself. For centuries, archaeologists had wandered through the scattered stones, trying to guess what the original structures might have looked like. They proposed courtyards, walls, ceremonial platforms. But guesses come with bias. Human beings fill in gaps with what they expect to see. The AI had no such weakness. Piece by piece, like the world's hardest jigsaw puzzle, the system digitally snapped fragments together. Broken blocks aligned seamlessly with their missing halves. Tool marks on one stone matched the patterns of another. Gradually, the ruin was no longer a ruin. It was a structure, complete, multi-leveled, intentional. What emerged stunned the researchers. Puma Punku wasn't a random scattering of massive stones. According to the reconstruction, it was once a giant architectural marvel, complete with raised platforms, interior chambers, gateways connected by corridors, and an intricate system of channels carved into stone with surgical precision. These channels weren't decorative. The AI simulations showed that water could flow through them at controlled rates, filling shallow pools. Positioned correctly, these pools would reflect the night sky above, turning still water into a mirror of the heavens. In other words, Puma Punku may have functioned as a kind of celestial observatory, using water and stone to map the stars. But that was only the beginning. The real revelation wasn't about what Puma Punku looked like. It was about how it was built. The AI discovered something startling in the H-blocks, those iconic andesite pieces that have puzzled experts for decades. By measuring every groove, every recess, every slot, the machine found that 45 of these blocks weren't just similar. They were identical. Their dimensions matched down to thousandths of an inch, as if they had all been carved from a single master template. This implied something radical: standardization. The builders of Puma Punku weren't improvising. They weren't carving stones one at a time with unique shapes. They were mass-producing components, the same way modern factories churn out identical car parts. The AI identified a core set of 19 block types, each repeated across the site. Walls, gateways, terraces, water channels, all assembled from the same modular toolkit. Combine the blocks one way, you got a gateway. Combine them another, you got a wall. Rearrange them differently, you got a platform. This wasn't random stonemasonry. This was prefabrication, the very principle that drives modern construction. The shocking part? Puma Punku predates the concept of prefabrication by over 1,000 years. As the AI rebuilt the site digitally, a deeper pattern emerged. The geometry wasn't arbitrary. Over and over, the system detected very specific ratios embedded in the design. Doorway heights, slab widths, even distances between gateways followed the mathematical constant of 1 to 1.618, the golden ratio. The golden ratio is famous for being nature's blueprint for beauty and harmony. We find it in seashells, galaxies, even the proportions of the human body. Renaissance architects used it to design cathedrals. Modern designers use it in logos and art. But at Puma Punku, a pre-industrial society had not only discovered it, but encoded it into their architecture. The deeper the AI looked, the stranger it became. Alignments across the site pointed not just to solar solstices and equinoxes, things ancient cultures often tracked, but to constellations, polar star paths, and even lunar standstill positions. Most chilling of all? The sky positions embedded in Puma Punku's layout matched what the heavens looked like around the 6th century AD. It was as though the builders had frozen the cosmos into stone, capturing a specific window of time. The conclusion was haunting. Puma Punku wasn't just a ruin, it was a machine. An astronomical clock built not to measure days or seasons, but centuries. Think about what that means. The builders weren't merely stacking rocks to honor gods or rulers. They were encoding knowledge. They were leaving behind a system, a warning, a blueprint, carved into stone so that it could survive long after their civilization was gone. And then, the AI turned its attention to the site's destruction. Why were these perfectly engineered blocks scattered like toys tossed by a giant hand? Earthquakes and erosion were the traditional explanations, but the debris pattern didn't fit. The stones hadn't simply toppled, they had been hurled. The system calculated the kinetic energy required to throw multi-ton blocks the distances observed. The result pointed not to slow decay, but to sudden, catastrophic force, the kind produced by explosive airbursts or massive flooding. In other words, the very kind of cosmic disasters Puma Punku might have been designed to predict. Suddenly, the ruin took on an even darker tone. It wasn't just a monument to knowledge. It may have been a monument to fear, a warning encoded in stone. Watch the skies. This will happen again. The AI had stripped away centuries of debate and speculation. What remained was simple, unsettling, and undeniable. Puma Punku was engineered. It was standardized. It was aligned with cosmic precision. And its destruction may have been tied directly to the very cosmic cycles it encoded. But if all that is true, then a question even bigger than Puma Punku itself comes crashing down. Who built it? Because the Tiwanaku, as far as we know, did not have factories. They did not have advanced astronomical tools. They did not have the means to cut, transport, and assemble 100-ton stones into modular components of a cosmic clock. If not them, then who? When knowledge turns into warning. The AI reconstruction had already shocked the researchers. Prefabrication, modular construction, sacred geometry, celestial alignments. Puma Punku was no longer just an ancient ruin. It was the blueprint of a mind that seemed far ahead of its time. But the deeper the system analyzed, the stranger and more disturbing the story became. Because this wasn't just about what Puma Punku was. It was about why it was built. The site's alignments with the sun, stars, and moon were impressive enough, but the AI didn't stop there. By running simulations of celestial motion encoded in the site's geometry, the program noticed something no human had recognized before: a pattern of cycles. These weren't cycles of simple seasons. They weren't just equinoxes or solstices. They were long cycles. events that repeated not every year, but every few centuries. The AI traced alignments pointing toward unusual celestial events. The paths of cometary debris streams, positions of lunar standstills, and even hints of potential meteor showers. In other words, Puma Punku might not have been designed to simply observe the heavens. It may have been designed to predict them. Imagine that for a moment. An ancient society building a colossal astronomical machine not just to track the sky, but to forecast catastrophic cycles, impacts, floods, cosmic disruptions that threatened human survival. If true, Puma Punku wasn't just a temple. It was a warning system, a giant stone calendar ticking not toward harvests, but toward disaster. And then came the darkest twist of all. The AI turned its attention to the destruction of the site. For centuries, the scattering of Puma Punku's blocks had been blamed on earthquakes, weathering, or looters. But the pattern of debris didn't behave like simple collapse. Stones weighing over 100 tons weren't just toppled, they were thrown. Using physics models, the AI calculated the energy required to hurl multi-ton blocks across the plateau. The forces didn't match normal tectonic activity. Instead, they were eerily consistent with the blast wave of an explosive airburst, the kind produced when a comet or asteroid explodes in the atmosphere, like the Tunguska event in Siberia in 1908, which flattened over 2,000 square kilometers of forest in seconds. Other models suggested catastrophic flooding could have been responsible. Geological surveys of the region show evidence of sudden water surges tied to glacial melt and shifting levels of nearby Lake Titicaca. Picture a wall of water roaring across the plain, lifting and tossing even 100-ton stones like toys. Whichever the case, the conclusion was grim. Puma Punku wasn't just destroyed. It was destroyed violently, possibly by the very cosmic or environmental forces it was built to monitor. The irony is chilling. If Puma Punku was a machine designed to warn of disaster, then its own end may have been the very disaster it warned about. And this realization left researchers shaken. Because it meant Puma Punku didn't require alien intervention or science fiction. It pointed to something even scarier: a lost human intelligence. A society 1.5 millennia ago, or perhaps even older, that had mastered precision engineering, modular construction, and astronomical forecasting. A culture that looked into the heavens, read the cycles of the cosmos, and tried to preserve that knowledge in stone. And then it vanished. No gradual decline, no record of technological diffusion, no manuals, no tools, no continuity. The knowledge just stopped, as if someone pulled the plug on a civilization that was centuries ahead of its time. The silence is almost as haunting as the stones themselves, because if such brilliance could vanish once, it raises an uncomfortable question. Could it vanish again? History is full of moments when knowledge was erased in the blink of an eye. The burning of the Library of Alexandria, the collapse of the Maya, whose writing system was nearly lost forever. Entire languages, sciences, and technologies wiped away by war, famine, plague, or natural catastrophe. Puma Punku may represent the most extreme version of that cycle. A civilization so advanced it could rival modern thought, erased so completely that all that remains are mute blocks of stone, whispering warnings across time. And perhaps that is the true purpose of Puma Punku. Not to stand as a temple, but as a message that knowledge is fragile, that civilizations can fall, that the sky is not always a place of wonder, but of danger. It's one thing to believe ancient people worshiped the stars. It's another to realize they may have feared them. And the fear wasn't baseless. Around the year 536 AD, not long after Puma Punku is thought to have been active, historical records from across the world describe a mysterious, dark age. Byzantine historian Procopius wrote that the sun gave forth its light without brightness. Tree ring data confirms a sudden cooling event. Some scientists point to massive volcanic eruptions. Others suspect a cometary impact or airburst. Is it coincidence that Puma Punku was violently destroyed in roughly the same era that the skies grew dark? Or is it possible that the builders knew, encoded the warning, and then lived through the very catastrophe they feared? The AI didn't answer that question, but it didn't need to. The implications were terrifying enough. Because Puma Punku forces us to confront a possibility most historians are uncomfortable with. History is not a steady climb from primitive to advanced. It may be a cycle, a sawtooth of brilliance and collapse, of lost peaks of knowledge that flare and vanish, leaving only stone to tell the story. And if that cycle is real, the stones of Puma Punku may not just be a warning about the past. They may be a mirror held up to our own future. The global trail of impossible monuments. Puma Punku is extraordinary on its own, but what makes it even more unsettling is that it doesn't stand alone. Once you zoom out from the wind-swept plateau of Bolivia, the ruin starts to look less like an isolated anomaly and more like a missing piece in a far bigger puzzle. A puzzle scattered across continents, cultures, and centuries. Because when you compare Puma Punku to other ancient sites, a chilling pattern begins to emerge. Across the world, we see the same impossible hallmarks. Stones too large to move with primitive technology. Cuts too precise for the tools of their time. Alignments too exact to be coincidence. Knowledge encoded into architecture as if the builders were leaving behind messages in stone. Let's start close to home. Machu Picchu, Peru's lost city in the clouds. Tourists marvel at its terraces clinging to the mountain ridge, but look closer at the walls. Massive granite blocks, cut and fitted so perfectly that not even a sheet of paper can slip between them. No mortar, no cement, just stone interlocking with uncanny precision. The Inca are credited with building it in the 15th century, long after Puma Punku. Yet the style of its stonework echoes much older techniques, like those found at Sacsayhuaman. Was this independent invention? Or were the Inca inheriting techniques from a far older, forgotten tradition? Perhaps even from the same legacy that created Puma Punku? Then, look east, to the Bekaa Valley of Lebanon. Here lies Baalbek, one of the most jaw-dropping sites in the ancient world. The Roman temple complex of Heliopolis is impressive enough, but its foundations tell a stranger story. 3 colossal limestone blocks, known as the Trilithon, weigh over 800 tons each. Nearby, an even larger block, the so-called Stone of the Pregnant Woman, tips the scales at more than 1,000 tons. To put that in perspective, that's heavier than a fully loaded Boeing 747. Modern cranes would struggle to lift it. And yet, somehow, ancient engineers not only quarried these stones, but transported and positioned them with mathematical precision. Some scholars argue the Romans had clever methods, but others whisper a darker thought, that the foundation may predate Rome entirely. Sound familiar? Just like Puma Punku, Baalbek features stones too large for the time, arranged with engineering sophistication that doesn't match its supposed builders. Now, travel north to Turkey. There, buried beneath layers of soil until its discovery in the 1990s, lies Göbekli Tepe. Dated to around 11,000 years ago, it predates writing, agriculture, even the wheel. And yet, hunter-gatherers, supposedly primitive nomads, carved massive T-shaped limestone pillars weighing up to 20 tons each, arranged in circular enclosures. Some are decorated with intricate carvings of animals. The site is aligned with celestial events, suggesting advanced astronomical knowledge. According to the textbooks, people at that time were too primitive to plan, design, and build monumental architecture. But Göbekli Tepe proves otherwise. Knowledge appeared, then vanished, only to reappear thousands of years later. And of course, there is Egypt. The Great Pyramid of Giza remains one of the most studied and most misunderstood monuments in human history. Built over 4,000 years ago, it consists of more than 2 million limestone blocks, some weighing up to 15 tons. Its base is aligned almost perfectly with true north, accurate to a fraction of a degree. Its proportions encode mathematical constants like pi and the golden ratio. Its layout mirrors the alignment of Orion's belt in the night sky. For centuries, people have marveled at its construction. How did the ancient Egyptians, with copper tools and wooden sledges, achieve such precision? The similarities are impossible to ignore. Just like Puma Punku, these sites reveal an obsession with massive stones, precise geometry, and cosmic alignments. Just like Puma Punku, they leave us asking whether knowledge was lost. Knowledge that once spanned continents? Consider this: civilizations separated by oceans, cultures that supposedly had no contact with one another, all building monuments that defy their tools, their resources, and their timelines. Were these independent bursts of genius? Or were they echoes of a deeper, older tradition, fragments of a global legacy scattered like breadcrumbs across time? What if the builders of Puma Punku were not an isolated people, but one branch of a civilization that once spanned the globe? A civilization that encoded its warnings, its astronomy, its understanding of cycles into stone monuments so durable they would outlast even their makers. It's a tantalizing thought. Imagine survivors of a catastrophe spreading across the world, carrying fragments of their knowledge. In one region, it becomes the techniques that later inspire the Inca. In another, it becomes the foundations beneath Roman temples. In Turkey, it survives as Göbekli Tepe. In Egypt, it rises into pyramids. Different cultures, different expressions, but the same fingerprints. This is what makes Puma Punku so chilling. Because it isn't just an outlier. It's part of a pattern. A pattern that suggests the story of human civilization is not linear, it's fractured, interrupted, erased, then rediscovered. And if that's true, then Puma Punku may be one of the clearest pieces of evidence that history as we know it is incomplete. That our timeline of progress isn't a straight climb, but a broken chain with missing links. Links carved in stone, waiting for us to put them back together. The silence after the stones. The artificial intelligence had done what centuries of scholars could not. It had peeled back the layers of rubble and revealed Puma Punku for what it truly was. Not just a ruin, not just a ceremonial platform, but a machine of knowledge. A modular, prefabricated, mathematically precise observatory. Perhaps even a cosmic warning system. And yet, That revelation only sharpened the most disturbing question of all. What happened to the people who built it? Because if Puma Punku was designed by minds capable of advanced geometry, precision engineering, and astronomical forecasting, then where did those minds go? Why is there no trace of their workshops, their tools, their writings? Why does their knowledge vanish from history like smoke blown into the wind? Archaeologists traditionally point to the Tiwanaku civilization. They argue that around the 6th century AD, the Tiwanaku rose to prominence, harnessed the resources of the Altiplano, and built monuments like Puma Punku as ceremonial centers. But the evidence doesn't quite fit. When excavations were carried out, Tiwanaku pottery and ritual objects were often found on top of Puma Punku's foundations, not within them. It's as if the Tiwanaku inherited the site, using it for their own purposes, but did not build its megalithic core. The stones themselves seemed older, out of place, disconnected from the culture usually credited with them. If not the Tiwanaku, then who? One explanation is brutally simple. Nature itself erased them. The Altiplano is no stranger to earthquakes, floods, and violent weather shifts. Geological evidence shows massive seismic activity in the region over the last 2,000 years. Nearby Lake Titicaca bears the scars of sudden and catastrophic water level changes, likely caused by glacial melt or shifting tectonics. A flood could have swept across the plain, tearing apart Puma Punku and drowning its keepers of knowledge. Another possibility is more cosmic. Around the year 536 AD, global records describe a mysterious, dark age. The skies dimmed, crops failed, and temperatures plummeted. Tree ring data confirms a sudden cooling event. Some scientists attribute it to volcanic eruptions. Others suspect the airburst of a comet or asteroid. The AI had already suggested that Puma Punku may have been tracking such celestial cycles. If that's true, then perhaps the disaster they feared finally struck, not only destroying their monument but silencing their civilization. But maybe it wasn't just catastrophe. Maybe it was human fragility. Imagine a society where knowledge is held tightly by a small elite: astronomers, engineers, priests. If disaster strikes that group, through war, disease, or political collapse, the knowledge dies with them. History offers grim examples. The burning of the Library of Alexandria, where centuries of science, philosophy, and mathematics went up in flames. Or the fall of the Maya, where the scribes who held their written language were lost, leaving behind glyphs that only modern scholars are beginning to decode. Puma Punku may represent the most extreme version of that same tragedy. A knowledge system centralized in the hands of a few, wiped away in an instant, leaving the rest of the population with nothing but stones they could no longer understand. Some Andean legends whisper about Viracocha, a bearded figure said to have emerged after a great flood, teaching survivors arts like farming and building. Was he a god? Or was he a mythologized memory of the last engineers of Puma Punku, the few who survived to pass on fragments of their knowledge before fading into folklore? It's a haunting thought that the echoes we see in Machu Picchu, Baalbek, Göbekli Tepe, and Egypt's pyramids may be the fractured inheritance of a once unified knowledge system. That a global civilization, or at least a network of advanced cultures, rose, thrived, and fell, leaving only impossible monuments as evidence that they had ever existed. And that brings us to the paradox. The AI reconstruction solved one mystery. It showed that Puma Punku was engineered, modular, mathematically aligned, and astronomically coded. But in doing so, it opened a far deeper mystery. How could such brilliance vanish so completely? A society capable of embedding celestial cycles into stone should have left behind more than ruins. Where are their tools, their records, their successors? The silence that follows Puma Punku is almost louder than the stones themselves. It forces us to confront the fragility of human knowledge, how easily it can be erased, how quickly it can be forgotten. And it forces us to ask, what if the same thing could happen again? We like to believe our civilization is invincible. We have satellites, supercomputers, skyscrapers, and global networks. But imagine a sudden catastrophe, a solar flare that fries electronics, a nuclear conflict, an asteroid airburst, or even just centuries of neglect after collapse. How long before our skyscrapers crumble, our satellites fall, our records are unreadable? How long before survivors look at rusted metal and decayed concrete with the same incomprehension we feel at Puma Punku's stones? It wouldn't take long. Within 1,000 years, maybe less, most of our achievements would be gone. And the future might look back at the ruins of our cities the way we look at Puma Punku, baffled, wondering how we did it and why it all disappeared. That may be the true warning of Puma Punku, that civilizations rise, achieve brilliance, then fall. That history is not a ladder, but a cycle of progress, collapse, and silence. And if that's true, the question becomes urgent. Where are we in that cycle? Are we climbing? Are we at the peak? Or are we, like the builders of Puma Punku, standing unknowingly at the edge of another fall? The stones themselves may hold the answer. The AI found alignments suggesting long cosmic cycles, cycles of comets, impacts, solar disruptions. If the builders were right, then what destroyed them could happen again. Perhaps not tomorrow, perhaps not this century, but eventually. Maybe Puma Punku isn't a ruin at all. Maybe it's a message, a stone-encoded warning across time. Watch the skies, because this will happen again. And here's the most unsettling thought of all. Will we listen? Or will we, like them, vanish into silence, leaving behind only mute monuments to puzzle whoever comes after?